In a campaign long ago and far away, a group of adventurers defeated a Medusa in her lair. They had known where she was and the basic setup. They were prepared for this battle. They had, taken precautions. They knew not to look directly into her eyes. They had their spells set up. They were reasonably sure they could beat her, but there were a few close calls, a couple of saving throws against that petrification. But when they had defeated the Medusa, and they started going over her treasure, they saw, sprinkled all around the earlier victims of her petrifying gaze. Statues, you often see this in the lair of a Medusa. And they noticed one statue in particular was very interesting. An 8-foot-tall humanoid with features unlike any kind of giant that any of these characters were familiar with. Very almost perfect angelic features. The other thing that was interesting was the color of the stone, a sort of copperish gold, unlike the granite sort of color of the other statues. This was very fascinating. But the players had no access to a stone to flesh spell. They just, chalked it up as another oddity of King's World, and they moved on. But then, one day later, while again adventuring in the wilderness, they ran into a group of creatures whose identity has been lost to the mists of time, but they defeated them. They tracked them back to their lair. I believe there was another battle there. Defeated them, found their treasure, and there was a scroll. And one of the spells on this scroll was a stone to flesh. Now, this is a very valuable item. Medusa, Gorgon, cockatrice, all sorts of creatures that petrify. Most players were not high enough level to just carry that spell around, so this was a valuable scroll. One of the players suggested, you know what? Let's go back to the Medusa's lair and use this spell to, bring back to life the 8-foot-tall, mysterious, golden humanoid. There was some arguing back and forth. This is an unusual move, but, there was a thing of what's going on here. There's some mystery. There might be, far greater reward for releasing this humanoid from its prison than just this spell. So they went back and they did this. And this unleashed in this campaign an incredible storyline, an incredible NPC, and most of all, this humanoid became a, enigma wrapped inside a riddle. Basically, it was the mystery of the Golden Man. Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So today I am talking about this Golden Man, this legendary encounter in terms of this campaign. Players talked about it for many years later. They freed this strange humanoid from, being petrified. And I'm going to talk about it because it represents very much so a lot of techniques, storytelling techniques, game techniques, meta theory in terms of when you're playing D&D. It also reflects, improvisation, the sense of the mysterious in, any kind of fantasy setting. Also, how you kind of roll with the punches as a GM, and how you also, don't need to control everything that happens. So there's a lot here, and I want to get started. And what I want to do is I want to tell the story of the Golden Man, first from the perspective of the players who came across him, and then my perspective as a GM. So I'm going to start where I picked off. As I mentioned, he got this name because I had thought of him as being copper color, but I said sort of copper and golden, and he just became known as the Golden Man, as you'll see. So that's what I used. And so one of the things I forgot in my introduction, I wanted to talk about the argument here and the decision making, because this is the first sort of instance of a little bit of a metagaming by this group. When they found the stone to flesh spell one day later, there was a sense among them. They didn't say this out loud, but I could tell that they thought this. Hey, King gave us this stone to flesh spell. Obviously, he wants us to go back and free this strange humanoid. None of the other figures in the cave statues were very interesting. Now, again, they didn't say this. Some of the other players were like, well, wait a second. Who is this person? What if he's totally evil? What if he's like a god? What if he just kills us right on sight? The main player, my buddy Norm Taylor, was the guy in the group that was like pushing this, said, listen, he got defeated by a Medusa. He can't be that powerful. We'll take detect evils. In those days, you could just, anyone that was evil, we'll know, have a sense of his alignment, and we'll just see what happens. So they go back, and they release this figure. And now this 8-foot-tall, golden man, totally hairless, angelic, beautiful face is standing there. And he disappears. He's gone. Well, you can imagine there was some gnashing of teeth. People very bitter about this. They looked around in the Medusa's lair. They went outside, basically a cave, and there, sitting on a rock, was the Golden Man. And he got up and greeted them. And they began asking him questions. What is your name? Where are you from? How long have you been there? And he was not helpful. He said, names are not important. You've rescued me. I appreciate that. You can call me friend. He wouldn't talk about where he was from. All he cared about was where he was now. He wanted information from them. Where are you from? What's your story? And they gave him as much, they just told him what they were doing. They're out adventuring, this and that. They talked about city-states and whatnot. He listened. But basically, he wouldn't give them any information. They asked, how did you do this? Disappearing and like teleporting outside. He didn't say anything. Are you a spellcaster? What is your power? All this kind of stuff, nothing. He just said, I'd love to be able to accompany you. So what could they do? The Golden Man started coming with them. It quickly became obvious. He had this ability to use a D-door type teleport. He would go a certain distance. They weren't sure if it would go, unbelievably far, but that's what he could do. He would, D-door out 60 feet away anytime he wanted. It seemed to be at will. It seemed to be limitless. He's 8 feet tall. He has tremendous strength. He doesn't have any weaponry. He has this cloak, sort of a flowing robe thing. He doesn't throw any spells. He doesn't have any abilities. He never fights anything. So when the player characters, as they're going along, get into a battle, he parries. But he has a tremendously, what today would be a high armor class, 22 or 24, something like that. In those days it was negative, but you get the idea. And he would parry with things that fought. But some battles, he would literally D-door over and watch the battle. Even if the players were, on the edge, right? And what they began to notice was it seemed like the Golden Man wouldn't fight, sort of like animals or neutral creatures or, even elementals. So he would fight evil creatures. And again, not always. If the group was overpowering something, he would just go and observe. And they asked him, why aren't you helping us? And all these questions, and he just said, I'm just accompanying you. He also didn't seem to require much sleep. He would do sort of a trance for a few hours every night, but not quite like the elven trance we have today. He was sort of a catnap. He could wake up at any moment and be prepared. So obviously at night, when you're camping out in the wilderness, this was an advantage to the group. He also, as I said, had tremendous strength. Sometimes he would use this to help them in a situation. Sometimes not. He was very enigmatic. He would never give his reasons of why he was doing things. He was very close-lipped. He would also do some strange things. Sometimes the group person would get up in the morning and there would be the Golden Man listening to a tree or, staring or mumbling to a rock, right? Looking off into the distance. There was something otherworldly about him. And then another thing that he would do was occasionally they'd be going somewhere and he might say, over there in those hills is a very interesting waterfall. And they'd be like, and they'd go, there was an interesting waterfall, there was an adventure, an encounter. How did you know this? What did you know? And he just said, there it is. There was no more explanation, right? But when they asked him questions, do you know anything about this? Do you know anything about that? Nothing. He would never respond to this. It was only every once in a while he would make some observation, talk about something. When they were in a jam, when they were, desperate for something, he might say something, but it was enigmatic, but he might not. So there was a level of frustration with the Golden Man, but also a recognition that, in many ways he was helping the party. He was in some ways perhaps more useful than a stone to flesh spell. So this went on for 5 or 6 sessions. We ran once a month, maybe a few more than that. And the players got into a battle situation where things got out of hand. I believe it was a group of trolls. There might have been a few too many of them. You know how trolls regenerate. Some people got hit. They got overwhelmed. I think they were surprised, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the battle, one of the characters, Norm Taylor, died. And he was dead. He could not be cured up. He needed to have a raised dead. He was beyond the limit of what it was in those days. But here's the thing. They were a long ways from a city. They had no ability to move quickly. They needed, I think it was 10 days to get back to use the raised dead. It looked like Norm was gone. And then the Golden Man came over to Norm, laid hands on him, surrounded by a strange golden light, and Norm came to. He'd been raised. And he was a little tired. He was for a day. He sort of had to rest, but he was back. And the Golden Man said, I thank you for releasing me from the Medusa's lair. And then he D-doored away, never to be seen again. The players asked about this. They searched out at towns, whatever, for a long time. They never found anything. They asked me when the campaign was basically over, who was the Golden Man? Where was he from? I was always like, you know what? You may meet him again. We're going to start a campaign on this continent or whatever. Never talked about him. That was the mystery and enigma of the Golden Man. So, of course, the assumption is I know everything there is to know about the Golden Man, right? I know where he's from, what his objectives were, why he did this to the players, why he acted, why he had these abilities, right? But in fact, I had no idea. Because this is the thing. Now, from the GM's perspective, this same story. When I created the Golden Man, the 8-foot-tall, I thought copper, shaded statue, it was for atmosphere. I just did it to put something different in the Medusa's lair. I had no intention of, running this or whatever because, first of all, I knew they didn't have that kind of spell, and I thought even if they did find one sometime, they're not going to come back and do this. Then, when they ran into this encounter a day later, and I rolled, or do they have a lair? That's what we used to do in those days. Yes, they do. They find the lair. Does it have treasure? Yes, it does. And I rolled random. It was a kind of wandering monster. So I hadn't prepared this. I just rolled a scroll. I rolled randomly. There was a stone to flesh spell. The players metagamed this, thinking that I was saying, hey, go back and, bring back the Golden Man. I wasn't thinking that at all. So when they did it, I had nothing prepared. So on the, just spur of the moment, I gave him this D-door ability, kind of for laughs, but also just because I was sort of, what's his powers? But then they came out, they saw him. I didn't have him answer any questions. Wouldn't give him his name. Wouldn't give them any information, thinking, well, I'm just going to have to come up with the Golden Man. I'll figure out who he is, where he's from. I'll do that later. So that was the, opening session just for convenience, in terms of improvising. I was going to wait. Well, then what happened was the next time we ran, we're getting ready to run, we're starting off, and everybody's like, hey, who's the Golden Man? They ask him again. And I realized I had forgotten all about the Golden Man. I hadn't done any work to prepare. I hadn't thought about it, ideas, whatever. And so I did it again, basically. And then once I started doing this, I realized, you know what? He has this D-door ability. I had already improvised as they ran with him that he didn't need much sleep. I figured he had a lot of strength. I also didn't have him helping because I wasn't sure whether he would help them in battle. So I just kept the parameters of the Golden Man as I had sort of improvised them that very first time the players had run with him. And this is how I kept it going. And then I did do some things where I thought, oh, he'll say these enigmatic phrases. He will provide some encounters. He parried, he was a tremendous defender. If the group was overwhelmed, he could hold on to one creature, basically not be hit. He did get injured occasionally, and I had him have sort of a self-healing. He did not require any heals from the players. He had kind of a self-healing capability. The next day, he seemed to be okay. He still had some marks on him. Again, these were just things that I sort of just made up on the spur of the moment to keep the Golden Man around, but I didn't want his impact. I wanted it to be mysterious. And it was mysterious to me because I had never planned on creating this. This happened from the actions of the players. This is the story that develops in D&D. The players do things you don't expect as a GM, and you have to react to them. And because I hadn't prepared, because I just let him, the Golden Man, sort of evolve, naturally, as it were, he became, in many ways, as much of a mystery to me as to them. I didn't know what he was going to do. I would roll kind of randomly for his actions. I would roll randomly to see if he would make some enigmatic comment, whether he would reveal something. I didn't want to know what the Golden Man would do because I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he was from. I didn't know where he was going. I didn't know if he was from 1,000,000 years ago or, a week ago. I never knew. And in some ways I would compare this. If you think of Tom Bombadil, the famous character in Lord of the Rings that the hobbits meet in the book in the Old Forest, and he's described, as this ancient creature, very powerful. When it's suggested he should get the ring, Gandalf says, no, he doesn't care about this. He might forget that he has it. But it's also kind of intimated that he doesn't have anything to fear from Sauron or anything. He's ultra powerful. He's something from the ancient world. Well, famously, when Peter Jackson made the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he just eliminated Tom Bombadil. He says it doesn't really work in the story. Everything comes to a halt. He doesn't forward the narrative, really. People have said this that have read the books. And it's said in a meta-theory, meta-writing way, Tolkien had created Tom Bombadil before he had the idea for Lord of the Rings as part of his, mythos and the Silmarillion and all that stuff. And he loved this character. And so he put him in the book, I think Goldenberry, or I can't remember his wife's name. But it didn't really have anything to do with the plot. But here was this mysterious figure from an ancient time, super powerful, as old as the world itself, maybe even older than the gods. Someone could give me the name of those, or I'll put them on here, the Valor and Valor, whatever. That's how old he was. And that was the sense I realized that the Golden Man had, that he was from some place so ancient, so powerful, maybe some other plane of dimension, maybe he'd been around forever. And this is the kind of mysterious thing you have in a fantasy campaign, where something is created. This is what I was going for. Because here's the true power of the Golden Man and why he became kind of this legendary and mysterious figure for this group of player characters. Because unlike a typical big bad villain who's just blasting away, has these evil designs and wants to, control the world or whatever, Golden Man had none of that. What he had was narrative power. He had come out of the process by which the player characters and the GM create the world, of D&D. They had rescued him from the Medusa lair. He was kind of a mysterious figure. He stayed with them. He had certain powers. They weren't overwhelming. He said these enigmatic things. He also, led them to some adventures. He helped them out of some jams. And then when the group had found themselves, in a deadly situation, he did, as I pointed out in an earlier video on using Deus Ex Machina to save the group, check that out. He provided for Norm Taylor, the character that had, basically been instrumental in bringing him back. He, gave him a raised debt. Where did he get that power? I had no idea. What I knew was, as the sessions went on, I realized, okay, the Golden Man can't be here forever, right? Chapters are ending. Something has to happen. Something is going to occur in which it's logical for him to disappear. This was the perfect chance. I gave him that ability, and off he went. And as I said, the final thing was they never got an answer. They thought, King's going to just tell us what this was. I never did. Well, he'll reappear sometime. He never did. Until now, and if you're out there, Norm, somewhere watching, there's the answer to your constant questioning about who the hell was the Golden Man. Because that mystery is what gave it narrative power. There are things in the world we don't understand. There are mysteries, enigmas, things that are way above our pay grade in terms of, the world, the real world and in the world of D&D. That gives it narrative power. So think about that for your world. Think about creating mysterious personages, places, things that maybe you don't have to have fleshed out. And if you keep them moderate, if you keep things sort of, at a simple level, but it makes sense in terms of consistency, you're going to give your world a flavor and a character that makes it seem real because of that mystery. And you allow the players to do things, when they do things out of the box and you have to improvise, you don't have to just shut everything down until I can figure out all the Golden Man stats and where he came from. No, go with it, keep it simple. Maybe you'll, after the session, come up with a whole explanation for some place or some figure. But if you don't, if you leave it a little mysterious, even to yourself, it gives it that something special that I think, is what makes D&D, as I keep saying, the greatest game ever invented. So that's my story of the Golden Man. Hopefully that's helpful to you. Hopefully this channel is helpful. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments, maybe some mysterious figures or places, or maybe some improvising you have to do. I'm going to do a video on that coming up here soon. Most importantly, of course, keep playing D&D. Keep creating, places and personages and adventures and encounters for this game that we all love, and tell somebody else about it.